Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars. In today's video, I'm going to try to answer the question, does the insulation on the wire that was used to make the coils in electric guitar pickup, does it matter? In other words, should you be concerned with the type of insulation that was used in the wire that you're either going to be using to make pickups or in the pickups that you're shopping for and maybe thinking about buying to install in your guitar? Well, the short answer is yes, it does matter. There's basically three different types of insulation that you'll find most commonly on the wire that we use to wind the coils of our electric guitar pickups. They are heavy formvar, plain enamel, and polynylon. These are the most common insulation types, and they can be applied either in single build or heavy build. It just depends on the specific situation. But the reason why there are basically three different types of insulation has to do somewhat with the evolution of coil wire and tradition. Also, there are situations that require specific types of insulation. You have to remember, this type of wire was not just invented for making guitar pickups. It's used for winding all different kinds of coils for different situations. And in some situations, heavy formvar might be necessary. In other situations, plain enamel might be necessary. And in still other situations, the polynylon might be more suitable. So how do these three different types of insulation affect the tone of the pickups that we're making? And should you be very concerned with selecting the right insulation for the type of tone that you're attempting to achieve when making guitar pickups or when you're shopping for pickups? Sometimes you'll notice that guitar pickup manufacturers will actually list the type of insulation on the wire that they used in the pickups. It's not common, and you don't see it in every pickup that's marketed. It's most commonly used in pickups that are attempting to replicate a vintage style pickup, like an old Stratocaster single coil or the old Gibson PAF humbucker. In those cases, the pickups used a specific type of insulation. And so there are pickup manufacturers out there who use that exact type of, or similar type of wire to wind their pickups. So the question is, how do these three different types of insulation affect the tone of the pickups and ultimately the guitar that you're either going to build or that you own and would like to try to change the tone of? In truth, it's very difficult to say. We know that they do, those three different types of insulation do have an impact because pickups are extremely sensitive. The slightest change in their specification will affect the way they sound. And as a result, the type of insulation on the wire, which you can't even see or can barely see, some of the types of insulation does change the color of the wire so you can see it. But for the most part, it's a very thin coating, and it would seem like that would be inconsequential when it comes to affecting the tone of the pickup. However, a pickup like this has close to 10,000 turns of wire on it. So all those turns increases the effect of the insulation just by the sheer number of turns. The more there are, obviously, the more impact it would have. But does the type of insulation have a significant impact on tone? As I said, it does have an impact on tone. It has to, because it's one of the features that can affect the sensitivity of the pickup. However, I think it's safe to say that it would be difficult to determine exactly what that difference is, especially if you're relying on your ears to tell the difference. Now, if you're using, hardware, testing hardware, you could probably measure the difference in the frequency, and that might kind of give you an idea that the different types of insulation have a different impact on the outgoing signal. However, in order to do that, you would have to have something to compare to. So what you would need to do is you would need to make 3 identical pickups with the same gauge of wire, the same number of turns, and the same magnet. The only thing that would be different would be the type of insulation on the wire. So you would have one pickup that would be wound with heavy formvar, another one with plain enamel, and then another one with the poly nylon. Then you could install them into a guitar and play it and see if you could detect a difference with your ears. Or you could hook it up to test equipment and measure the frequency response coming out of the pickup. So you're probably wondering, well, Chris, why don't you just do that? I mean, after all, I make pickups, so why don't I actually make the 3 different pickups with the different types of insulation and then just play it and record it so that you could hear it? Or maybe hook it up to test equipment and show you the difference in the frequency response. The problem is there are other factors that have a significant impact on the tone of the pickups. The number of turns is just one factor. So if we keep that the same with all 3 pickups, we can kind of rule that out. The type of magnets, we could use the same magnet in all 3 pickups, like an Alnico 5 magnet. So we could rule that out, but only to a point, and I'll get to that in a minute. As far as the insulation is concerned, obviously that would be the differentiating factor. However, there is a couple of other factors that are critically important that will affect the tone that make it difficult to determine if the type of insulation is having an impact. One is the pattern of the wind. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this video, I would encourage you to click the thumbs up button down below. Do it right now. It's a great way to show my channel support, and it doesn't cost you anything. But if you'd like to take your support to the next level, you can visit my eGuitar Plans web store or my Howling Guitars merch store. There's links in the description below. And any purchase you make there is going to help support this channel so that I can keep making guitar building videos and sharing my knowledge and experience with you. You can also click the thanks button down below and leave a tip in the amount that you think is fair. But if you want to get the most out of my channel, I would encourage you to click the join button down below and consider becoming a member. As a member, you're going to have access to videos just like the one you're watching, but with a lot more information and detail, and best of all, no ads. Now let's get back to the video. Now, even though I use a CNC winder to wind my pickups, and I have different settings for different winding patterns, if I were to choose the same pattern for all 3 coils, one would assume that the coils would be identical, but they aren't, because fluctuations in the power current that drives both the motor that spins the bobbin as well as controls the traverse of the wire is going to change the pattern of the wind ever so slightly. So in truth, those 3 bobbins are going to be different. And that right there makes it almost impossible to tell if the insulation is having an effect or if these subtle differences in the winding pattern is having an effect. Another critical factor that needs to be considered is the magnets that I mentioned earlier. As I said, let's say we used nothing but Alnico 5 in all 3 pickups. Well, the problem is each pickup is liable to have a slightly different magnetic field because the Alnico magnets may be charged to slightly different levels. Now, we can try to charge them to exact precise levels, and that requires very specialized equipment to do that. But even then, it's still difficult to get the exact Gauss measurement for each of the magnets for those 3 pickups. So there's liable to be some subtle differences. There's also the potential differences in the composition, because remember, Alnico magnets are aluminum, nickel, and cobalt. And when you combine those together, because those are naturally occurring substances, they don't always mix together in a manner that's precise. So, and especially when it comes to the magnets that we purchase for pickups, they're not made to that level of precision. As a result, the magnets could have slightly different magnetic fields. So that introduces a new factor into determining what is causing the difference in tone between those three pickups. So in truth, the type of insulation on your coil wire, it is going to make a difference, but we have a very difficult time determining what that difference would be. And when it comes to designing a pickup to achieve a specific tone, you're better off focusing on factors that are more controllable. The number of turns on the coil, and then the type of magnet that you're going to use in the pickup. Because even though you don't have a lot of control over the magnets and its magnetic field, we do know that there's a difference in the tone from an Alnico 5 to, let's say, an Alnico 2, or to a ceramic magnet or an Alnico 8. They do all have significant impacts on tone. And I think that the gauge of the wire, the number of turns that you put on the bobbin, and the type of magnet that you choose will have way more impact than the type of insulation that's on the wire. You don't necessarily want to ignore the insulation type completely, because it does have, there is some other factors that you should consider. For one thing, polynylon insulated wire, which is the most modern contemporary type of insulation, is typically less expensive. So, you know, a big 5-pound spool like this, polynylon, is going to cost a lot less than either heavy formvar or plain enamel. And the other factor is the fact that polynylon is easier to work with. When you solder your leads to the ends of the wire, you simply touch a soldering iron and that melts away or melts back that polynylon insulation so that you can solder your leads directly to the wire, and it's easy to do. But with enamel and formvar, you have to scrape the insulation off with a razor blade, so it's a little bit more work. So that's the reason why I use the polynylon almost exclusively, because it's inexpensive, it's easy to work with. But if you're going to be making pickups that are an attempt at replicating a vintage style pickup, for example, a PAF humbucker or an old 50s style single coil strap pickup, then you're going to want to try to use the same type of insulation that was spec'd in those pickups. And that's just to stay true to what you're attempting to do. So you would use either the heavy formvar or the plain enamel. And the interesting thing is, when you go back and look at how some of those early pickups were made, you'll notice that they typically would switch between heavy formvar and plain enamel. And they go back and forth all the time. And I think the reason they did that was because of what was available and cost. They weren't concerned with, well, maybe they were a little bit concerned with the impact it might have on tone, but knowing how companies work and businesses work, I'm pretty sure their main concern was cost and availability. It wasn't necessarily that heavy formvar offered a better tone or plain enamel offered a better tone. And it's always important to remember that when it comes to tone, in truth, there's really no such thing as good and bad tone. There's just different tone. And you may think that this, you know, a particular tone might be bad, but then somebody else will think it's great. So it's always important to remember that tone is subjective. So if you're going to be making pickups or shopping for pickups, the only time I would worry about insulation is if you're trying to purchase a pickup that replicates a vintage style pickup. Sometimes they call them clones. But if you're just looking for a good value and a good sounding pickup, I don't think you should be so concerned with the type of insulation on the wire. And the same is true if you're going to be making your own pickups. I think that what's more important is, like I said, the number of turns, the gauge of the wire, and the type of magnet that's installed into the pickup. And then to a certain degree, how strong the magnet is charged. That's pretty much what I wanted to cover in today's video, and I hope that this has been something that you find useful and informative, or at least thought-provoking. If so, please click that thumbs up button down below and show my channel some love. It's free to do, doesn't cost you anything, and it's really helpful. And of course, if you want to really help support this channel and take it to the next level, you can do all the things that I said earlier in the video. And whatever you do is going to really help to support this channel, so I keep making these videos and sharing my knowledge and experience with you. At any rate, as always, until the next episode, take care, stay safe, and I hope you'll be back for more guitar building videos.